Hello everyone, my name is Gizem. This is the writing workshop of IELTS. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah, all right, perfect. How is everyone? Are you guys all right? While I'm sharing my screen? Yes. Good to see you again, Yasabi. Thank you for coming back. I'm seeing some familiar names. Good. Let's start with the class. I hope you can see my screen. Yes? No? All right, perfect. So let's start our class. Today, as we've said, we will be doing IELTS Writing Task 2. And today we will be focusing on the type of essay, which is advantages and disadvantages. This is one of the essay types that you will have to write. You probably will have to write in IELTS Writing Task 2. Before we start with this, I will give you like a general idea of the writing test in IELTS Academic. So basically what you need to do is that you will write 2 essays. So you will have 2 tasks, the first task and the second task. And for the first task, we will analyze a graphic or some sort. And for the second task, we will write a full essay. And this essay, the second task, is more important than the first one because the first essay, if the first task gets like 132 percentages of your score, total score, and this one gets a 66, around 66% of your score. So this essay, the second task, is really, really important for your IELTS academic writing score, actually. And while grading your essays, they will use these 4 criteria. So this is the IELTS band descriptors that they publicly publish. So basically, they have 4 criteria while grading your essays. And the first one is task response. The second one is coherence and cohesion. The third one is lexical resource, which is just a fancy way of saying vocabulary, basically. And the last one is grammatical range and accuracy. And according to these 4 criteria, you will get a score. So for example, for band 9, you need to fully address all parts of the task in task response. Any questions now before we move on to the details of these? If not, by the way, you can find this online because this is the public version. You can check this in detail anytime you want. And let's now talk about each criteria one by one. So for task achievement, you need to answer the question and understand the question type. To do that, you really need to focus on what the question asks, and you need to respond accordingly. So there are different types of IELTS essay questions, and you need to find which type of essay they're actually looking for. So this is task achievement. And if the question asks for your opinion, you need to make your position or opinion really clear. If you don't have like a clear position that you write throughout the essay, you will not achieve a good score in terms of task achievement. And for task achievement, you need to use the correct essay structure, which we will be focusing on in detail. But basically, you need to have 4 paragraphs: the introduction, the body paragraph 1 and the body paragraph 2, and a conclusion. So basically, you need to write 4 whole paragraphs. And you need to write more than 250 words to get a good grade on task achievement. Any questions before we move on to other criteria? You can use the chat box or you can raise your hands and I will give you permission to speak. Anything works. If there are no questions, let's go on to the coherence and cohesion criteria. So to get a good grade, to get a good band score in coherence and cohesion, you need to show the examiner that you have planned your essay before you're writing it. So you need to plan your essay as a whole. So you need to know which position you're going to take and what you will write in each paragraph before you actually write it. And while writing your essay, especially your body paragraphs, you need to give examples and provide evidences, so provide supporting points for your arguments. If you cannot write relevant examples or if you cannot write good supporting arguments and ideas, your band score in terms of coherence and cohesion will not be that great. And you need to be consistent throughout your essay. So this is similar to your position, your opinion. But you need to show that you're consistent throughout the essay, that you know what you're going to write, basically. And the third criteria, lexical resource, as I've said, is just a fancy way of saying vocabulary. So to get a good grade in lexical resource criteria, you need to use a wide range of vocabulary. You need to really show the examiner that you know all these different academic words that you can use in your essay in a limited period of time. And while doing that, of course, we're human. We can make some rare minor errors. As long as they're not that consistent, those errors, as long as they're not repeated, they're good. They don't prevent you from getting a band 9, for example. And you need to really look into the vocabulary range and vocabulary precision, which basically means that you need to use synonyms where possible. And so basically, if you know the synonyms of those words and if you can use them with ease, you can use them. You should use synonyms. You should do paraphrasing. But some words, of course, don't have direct synonyms. So if you have that words that you don't know the synonyms to, you can just rewrite the sentence grammatically, and that will again work as a paraphrased version. So you will kind of be using the same words, but in different grammatical structures. And while writing your essay, to get a good band score in lexical resources, you need to try to use some uncommon words related to the subject. So, for example, if the question asks you something about school, you can write education, you can write higher education, undergrad, grad, or something like that. So basically, you need to show the examiner that you know all these different vocabulary that you can use in a short amount of time. And the last criteria that we will be focusing, and the IELTS also focuses, is grammatical range and accuracy. Basically, to get a good score in grammatical range and accuracy, you need to show the examiner that you can use all these different grammatical structures, such as simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and also passive voice or different question sentences and conditional sentences. Basically, if you don't know what any of these are, you need to kind of study a bit of grammar before you actually try to enhance your writing. Because if you don't know how to write, for example, complex sentences or compound sentences, that's not going to be very helpful in terms of your IELTS writing. So basically, we need to know what these are. So we need to be able to use all of these, or at least some of these, to form complex sentences. So for example, we can use some linking words such as after, before, because, even though, but we can also, and we should also use different grammatical structures such as if clauses or unless, which is a type of forming if clauses. And we need to also use different relative clauses and noun clauses, which can be formed with these right here. And we need to kind of do them in almost every sentence that we are writing in IELTS, because they will help us make our sentences longer, and that will show the examiner that we know all these different grammatical structures and we can use them accurately. Any questions before we move on? Any questions about the band descriptors and the criterias? If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can use the chat box. Yes, someone unmuted themselves, you can speak.
As you told us that we have to use some compound complex sentences and conditional sentences as well. So is this necessary to use all the range of sentences, like conditional? There must be conditional sentences. There must be some compound complex.
So basically, if you write at least one of each these 6 criterias, each 6 sentence types, then the examiner will know that you can use them, each of them. But if you, for example, write a complex sentence, but you don't use actually conditional sentences, let's say, they will know you can use complex sentences, but they will not actually know if you know how to use conditional sentences. So what I would do, I would personally try to write at least one of each these 6 sentence types. so that the examiner can understand that I can use each of them. But it doesn't, of course, reduce your score dramatically if you fail to use one of these. Let's say if you fail to use an if clause, but you've written really good sentences with these other complex sentence criteria, grammatical structures, then the examiner, if he or she is a really nice person, can tell maybe she knows all these other things too, but she just didn't write them like as a personal choice. The examiner might think that, but it's only her opinion. I don't know if it's clear, but I would suggest you to use at least one of all these structures, because the examiner cannot otherwise know if you know how to use this, basically. But you don't have to do anything. It's just, if you want to get a good grade, a really good consistent grade, it would be better if you used at least one of each of these 6 sentence types. Does that answer your question? Do you have any other additional questions? All right. Any other questions before we move on to the details of the task 2 essay? All right, if not, you can always raise your hand and stop me, or you can use the chat box to ask me any questions. So if there are no questions about the criteria, the 4 criteria, let's move on to how we should structure our essay. So basically, in an advantage-disadvantage essay, what you need to do is you need to write 4 paragraphs, as we have talked about, and the first paragraph should be the introduction paragraph. And in the introduction paragraph, we need to first paraphrase the question that we're given. Usually, every question in IELTS gets an information sentence. And what we need to do in the introduction, in the first sentence of the introduction, is to just paraphrase that information sentence. So basically, they will give you, let's say, there are a lot of wars in nowadays, so let's say something like that. And we need to just write that there are a lot of wars in the world, but in a different grammatical structures, and we need to use synonyms if we can. So paraphrasing the question. And then we need to outline the opinions given in the statement. So for example, sometimes the questions give you things like, let's say, technology has a lot of disadvantages, but it also has a lot of advantages. And we need to, again, paraphrase that information given to us, that opinion given to us. And if the question asks for our opinion, as the third and final sentence of the introduction, we need to give our opinion. But if the question does not ask for our opinion, we shouldn't, or we don't have to give our opinion, because this is just an advantage-disadvantage essay. This question type does not actually ask for our opinion, usually. But if it does, we need to give our opinion. And in the second paragraph, we need to write our first body paragraph, the main paragraph 1. And it would be really good if we structured this essay type as 1 paragraph devoted to the advantages, and another paragraph, the second body paragraph, devoted to the disadvantages. Because in that way, we will be really organized in terms of how we organize our essay. So in the first body paragraph, we will only talk about the advantages, and in the second one, we will only talk about the disadvantages, which will show the examiner that we had some kind of an organization in our minds before we actually wrote this essay. And remember, organization is one of the criteria that the examiner looks for. So this will give us like an advantage before we actually took the exam, basically. And the paragraphs, the body paragraphs, should be structured as the first sentence starting with a topic sentence. So the topic sentence is basically where you write the main idea of that paragraph. So for example, a simple, really good topic sentence for the first paragraph can be, one of the advantages of this. So instead of this, you write the topic. One of the advantages of this is that, let's say. So this will show the examiner that we're going to write about the advantages in the first body paragraph, and we know what the topic is, what the overall essay question is, basically. Then we will have to explain that advantage that we've put forward. We need to say what that advantage is and how it is advantageous actually. So basically, we cannot just say, yes, this is an advantage and be done with it. We need to actually explain, actually really show the examiner that it is an advantage. While writing your essay, imagine that your examiner, the examiner that is reading your essay, does not know anything about this subject. So you need to explain every single detail to the examiner for him or her to understand what you're actually saying. So you need to convince the examiner that this is actually an advantage, basically. And to do that, you need to also use some examples. So for example, if you say this is an example, you need to show how that is an example, in what circumstances that can be advantageous, for example. And we will do the same for the second body paragraph, but we will just write disadvantages instead of advantages. We will have to explain why it is a disadvantage and in what circumstances, in which circumstances that can be a disadvantage. And then the second body paragraph will be also done. And we will end our essay with a conclusion where we need to summarize the key points. So we need to basically, again, paraphrase the question. So there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages of something. And we need to kind of give a summary of those topic sentences. So basically, you can just paraphrase those topic sentences too. And if the question asks for opinion, we can state our opinion too. And this is all the things that we need to do structurally in our essay. Any questions before we move on to the details? This was just the structure part. No? All right. If there are any questions, again, you can raise your hand or you can use the chat box. They're both fine. All right, if there are no questions, let's move on to the details. So basically, you need to really make sure if the question asks an advantage or a disadvantage, or advantages and disadvantages. So if the question asks these in the singular form, you need to write one advantage and one disadvantage. But if it says advantages and disadvantages, so in the plural form, you need to write more than one advantage and more than one disadvantage. Make sure that you check that out really clearly before you actually write your essay. While planning your outline, you need to really make sure if it asks for one advantage and one disadvantage or more than one, basically. Now, let's have an example advantage-disadvantage question type together. So for this part, you need to spend around 40 minutes. As I've said, in the writing part in IELTS exam, you have two tasks. The first one should be around 20 minutes. So you need to spend around 20 minutes for the first task, because remember, it affects your grade less than the second task. And for the second task, you should spend around 40 minutes. But you will need to arrange your time according to your own timing, because IELTS does not say, okay, 20 minutes is over, you need to stop with the first task. So you need to kind of decide when you're going to go into the second task, basically. But the required amount, the advised amount of time for this essay, the second task, is 40 minutes, basically. Let's analyze this question together. We will write on this together. So as you can see, this is the the information sentence. Let's read that. So it says, in the past, most people used to travel to their place of work. With increased use of computers, the internet, and smartphones, more and more people are starting to work from home. So what do we understand just looking at these two sentences here, these two information sentences? So we will write something about remote working or working in the office, right? So we will kind of write on these two topics. We will kind of find advantages and disadvantages of working from home, basically. So remote working. And the question asks us, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this development? So what are the advantages and disadvantages of changing our working places, basically, to the office, from the office to the home, basically. And as Abby writes in the chat box, we need to write at least 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages. Why? Because the question asks advantages and disadvantages. So it asks in the plural form. So we need to write at least 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages. And as Josephine says, we will kind of compare working online and working offline, but working offline does not actually mean working in the office, working from the office. So if we say working offline, that does not necessarily mean that we will be working in the office. So I would kind of not use the offline term while writing this essay, but working online is a good synonym of working from home, basically. You can write that. And the question, again, asks for other things, saying, give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge or experience. So if the question asks for our own knowledge or experience, we can write sentences like, for example, I have worked from home during COVID and I really enjoyed it, blah, blah, blah. So we can give our own experiences saying I. Usually in academic essay writing, using I is not that preferable, but if the question asks examples from your own knowledge, you can of course include those I sentences as well. And as we have said before, we need to write at least 250 words, but I would advise you to kind of write around 300 words. There is no upper word limit in IELTS academic writing, but I would advise you to not write more than 350 words, because if you write more than 350 words, you will not have the time to actually proofread and check your essay. And if you cannot check your essay, you might sometimes miss those small mistakes, such as he are instead of he is, right? So if we have the time to proofread our essays, we might correct those small mistakes, and they will actually help us with our grade tremendously. But if we write more than 350 words, we probably won't have the time to check our essay. So those mistakes will just stay there, and they will actually decrease our points dramatically. So we need to do that. So let's start with an introduction. We will write the introduction together, and we will have an example introduction, don't worry, but we will try to do it first together. So as you know, what we need to do in the introduction paragraph is to first paraphrase the information sentence given to us here. So basically, we need to write the synonyms and paraphrased versions of these 2 sentences. So in the past, most people used to travel to their place of work. How can we paraphrase this sentence? And there's actually an answer in the chat box. I will read that. Nowadays, people tend to work from home rather than going to cubicles. Yes, I think that could be a really good paraphrased version, but make sure that you write people tend to instead of people tends to, because people is plural, right? So we need to use the plural version of that verb. So we can say nowadays people tend to work from home rather than going to cubicles. So I think this is perfect, like this part, but cubicles does not necessarily be a synonym of working in the office, working from the office, because not everyone working in the office has to sit in those small cubicles, right? So I think we can write going to the office. I think that would be a better way of saying working from the office, because the question actually does not say office, so we can use it. So we will be paraphrasing still, we're just using the word office. Any other suggestions in terms of how we might have paraphrased this? So for example, what could we say instead of work from home or from home? What could we say instead of working from home? Yes, as Anjali said in the chat box, we can say remote working or working remotely. So let's say work remotely because we use tend to, so we need to have a verb. So we can say tend to work remotely rather than going to the office. I think this is a really good way of paraphrasing this sentence. You've done well, all of you. But I will kind of force you to changing the word people to, because people is included in the information sentence, and there are a lot of other ways that we can say people, especially in this context, because in this context, people are actually people who go to work, right? And there are some terms, some other words, how we can say people instead of saying people or humans, because humans is also really general. What we could write instead, as Anjali and Abi said in the chat box, we could say employees. That would be really, really good, because employees is a word in this context, right? Is a word saying people in this context only. And it's a really good way of saying people, actually. And we could also say, instead of most people, we can say many employees, but we don't have to, of course, use the synonym of most. It's not necessary, but we can say many too. Uh, Josephine, you wrote crowd in the chat box. I think, yes, it is a synonym. We can use it as a synonym to people, but I wouldn't kind of prefer it at this point, because in this context, we have other different ways of saying people in this context. So employees is one of those. So when I have other options that are specific to the context, I would actually try to use them, employees or workers and stuff like that. So there's another paraphrased version to this sentence. Let's read that too in the chat box. So Uzok says, in the present days, employees prefer to work remotely rather than going to the office. I think it's really pretty similar to what we're doing. Instead of saying nowadays, Uzok used in the present days, which are both fine. I would prefer to use nowadays because it's more like clear, it's out there, it's not wrong, and it doesn't have all these different words that just seem like we're using them to just get that 250 words. So when you have a shorter version of something, so nowadays instead of in the present days, try to use the shorter version, so nowadays, because then the examiner will not be confused in all these different words. Actually, they're not important, right? So in the present days does not give us any academic versions of anything. So while writing academically, make sure that you try to use the shorter versions of things instead of writing those long other structures. So for example, instead of saying, in spite of the fact that, you can just write although. And although sounds more academic instead of in spite of the fact that, basically. All right, let's move on to the second sentence. I think we have talked enough about the first sentence. How can we paraphrase the second sentence? So saying, with increased use of computers, the internet, and smartphones, more and more people are starting to work from home. How do we paraphrase this? With increased use of computers, internet, and smartphones, more and more people are starting to work from home. So yes, we can say, as people have become, I think, tech-dependent or technology-dependent would be a better way of saying tech-savvy. So as people have become more technology-dependent, would be, I think, a better way, more academic way of paraphrasing the first part. as people have become more technology dependent, how can we do the yes, we can, as Ansa has suggested, we can say people are working remotely due to the advances that would be more academical of technology. Yes, we can write that too. All right, how about the second part? People are working remotely. I think you're suggesting that here, remotely. What I would do, I would try to, again, paraphrase the people. What could we write instead of people here? And how can we give that idea saying more and more people instead of just people? We can just write more and more. So we can say more and more. Or we can say a greater number of people or individuals. Or we can say, yes, individuals is fine. Or we can again say employees. We can just say them too, because we have already established who those people are. So we can just write them instead of saying people or employees. A big amount of people, I wouldn't prefer it because it's not only a lot of people, right? It kind of says that increasing amount of people, not a big amount of people, but this amount is increasing day by day. So I would try to give that increasing emphasis in my sentence too. But I think something similar to this works fine. But since we have used working remotely, we can just say work from home here, work from home, or work online. They're all fine actually. If you say a bunch of people, that is a question in the chat box. If you say a bunch of people, first, that is not really academic. That's a daily use of saying a lot of people. And it still does not give the idea that this number is increasing day by day. So I would suggest like kind of not using that word like bunch, because it's not an academic. And it doesn't give that like increasing number of people idea. And there's another sentence. Let's read that too. As people have become dependent, people started to work online. People started working online. Yes, it's really good. I think you've all kind of grasped the idea here. So we need to somehow paraphrase this. And actually, even though I refused some of them, all of your ideas would work in IELTS Academic Essay. It's just that I was trying to force you to find the best versions of these things, so the best versions of paraphrasing this. And I think we've come up with a really, really good introduction, a really, really good paraphrased versions of those information sentences. But you could have used all of the other things that you've suggested. And if you wrote like really good if you included really good grammatical structures, and if you really included different vocabularies throughout your essay, you would still get a really, really good grade in IELTS Academic Writing, basically. So we have spent a lot of time here, but this is only due to the fact that we're achieving perfection, basically. You shouldn't spend that much time here because you will only have 40 minutes, but I think you've got a really good idea of how we paraphrase in the introduction. And basically, what we need to do after the paraphrasing, we need to say there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages of this development. We can just say like that. There are various, let's say, instead of a lot of, we can say there are various pros and cons, which are synonyms of advantages and disadvantages. There are various pros of cons of this change, let's say, instead of development. So we can also say this change or such change instead of this leads to various pros and cons in a people's life, let's say. In an individual's life, I meant to say. So we can do something like that. We can just say there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages, or we can use paraphrasing as much as we can. Yes, we can say numerous instead of various too. They're both fine. They're all fine, actually. As long as we kind of paraphrase that, it's all right. I think you've done a great job paraphrasing this, writing the introduction. Well done. Now, let's move on to the question part. So, what can we use instead of such as? We can say, for example, for instance, and like. And we can also say like such changes as, so we can use such as in a different way. Instead of saying advantages such as, we can say such advantages as. But they're all fine, we can use all of them. Just remember that even though these all mean the same thing, they're not actually used in the same way. So for example, we use such as like this, saying advantages such as this and that, or we can say such advantages as this and that. We need to use for example or for instance while starting a sentence. So like this, we need to write for example, we put a comma there, and we write our example sentence. It needs to be a sentence for us to use advantages and disadvantages, basically. And this is the same in for instance. We need to write for instance, put a comma there, and another sentence there. But we can use like, just as, such as. They're the same. Any questions about this? The word such as? Josephine, yes, you can use that. It's all right. Sorry, I was talking about this, so I couldn't answer your question. All right, if there are no questions, let's move on to how can we express a contrast. So a contrast is basically where we contrast two different ideas. So while we're writing on advantages in the first paragraph, we will be writing about the disadvantages in the second paragraph, right? So we will be writing on two different ideas. And while moving on to the different ideas, so to the disadvantages, we need to have that linking word that will show the examiner that we're changing the topic. So we were writing on advantages, and now we will write on disadvantages. Basically, we need to show that change. And to do that, we can use contrasting linking words, such as on the other hand, in contrast, although, and however. They're all correct. We can use all of them, but then again, they're also used differently. So on the other hand, in contrast and however, they get a comma and a sentence like these, but although does not get a comma, and it gets two sentences after it. So it is used like this, although, a sentence, and another sentence. Or we can say a sentence, although, and another sentence. So you can use all of them, but you need to somehow change the grammatical structures sometimes. Sorry, not somehow. You need to sometimes change the grammatical structures as you kind of use different things. All right, let's move on to how we can link sentences. So we can use whereas if we're showing a contrast, so like this. We can use although, as we have said, and we can use while. While does not necessarily need to be contrasting, but it can also be used while we're contrasting two ideas too. So basically, we could have just link these two sentences, these two information sentences together, but it's not really necessary. And we've also linked these two sentences saying as, so we've already showed the examiner that we can use, we can use as a linking word, as a linking structure, basically. Any questions about the introduction paragraph before we move on to other things? You can use the chat box or you can raise your hand. All right. Crystal clear? Perfect. Let's move on to the next page then. So as you can see here, we have an example essay which has 259 words, so it's more than the word limit, so it's good. Let's now read this essay together, paragraph by paragraph, and we will try to decide which band score this essay gets. All right, if you're ready, let's read the first paragraph. And while reading another example essay, whether it is this one or another one that you see anywhere, I would kind of suggest you write down the words that you don't know, and I would try to learn them. I would try to memorize them. And I would try to use them in my own essay because this is, I think, a really good way of learning new vocabulary, especially if we're writing on a context. So, for example, in this one, we will be writing about working, offices, home offices, right? Like remote working. And we will kind of see a lot of different words on this. And I think it would be really good to learn them in their own context than just looking them up and memorizing them. So what I would do if I were you, I would take notes of any words that I don't know, and I would also take notes of any grammatical structures that I don't know, and I would try to write an essay on this topic after this class ends. And I would try to use those same words and grammatical structures in my essay to kind of get better, actually. All right, let's start with the introduction. So, how we work has changed a great deal in recent years. So, what do you think about this sentence? This is the paraphrased version of the information sentence, if you remember. So, in the information sentence, it was saying, in the past, most people used to travel to their place of work. And this essay paraphrased it, saying, how we work has changed a great deal in recent years. I feel like this is like the best of what this person could have done because it has used a question sentence, a noun clause. So it kind of already showed the examiner, like in the first sentence, that this person can use noun clauses and this person can use them perfectly. So how we work has changed a great deal in recent years. This is starting with a question. This is not a question, actually. This is a noun clause, which is used with those question words, how, why, and what, but they're not actually questions. They're just saying the way we work. Another way of saying the way we work is how we work. And if you don't know, if you feel like you don't know enough noun clauses, I would suggest you to definitely look them up because they're a really good way of forming those complex sentences, basically. All right, so it says, how we work has changed a great deal in recent years. Whilst some people still travel to their place of work each day, others have the option to work from home. I think you guys have done a better job in paraphrasing the second sentence because this sentence still has travel to their place of work, which was included in the first sentence. I think we've did a better job at paraphrasing the second sentence, so congratulations again. But still, this sentence shows a linking word and showing that contrasting idea, because this essay is about contrasting those ideas, right? And this person have already shown the examiner that this person can use noun clauses, present perfect tense, simple present tense, contrasting linking words, and the ability to understand the subjects and paraphrase the question. I think this person has done a really good start in terms of the introduction and showing grammatical structures and vocabularies. All right, and as the last sentence, the essay goes, this has become possible since the birth of the internet and smartphones. which enable workers to be in constant contact with their colleagues and clients worldwide. This is again a really advanced way of paraphrasing those sentences because it again shows the examiner that this person can use present perfect tense, good paraphrasing skills, and a relative clause, and an advanced word, academic word like enable. And this person can use all these grammatical structures without fault, so without any mistakes. So I think even looking at the introduction, we can kind of guess which band score this essay is going to get. This is exactly what happens while the examiner is checking through your essay. So in the introduction paragraph, they kind of have an idea of how the essay is going because, for example, this person has used a lot of different structures in just 3 sentences. And all the 3 sentences, almost all the 3 sentences, are long, actually, disregarding the first one. But even the first one, even a short sentence like this, has different grammatical structures. This already looks like an 8.5 band essay. Yes, Abby, I agree with you. Maybe even more, right? Let's see how it does in the body paragraphs. But before we do that, do you have any questions regarding the introduction paragraph? Any questions on the introduction paragraph? So basically, it has done the same thing that we do, but it did a more advanced, more like a band 9 way of doing it, basically. And still, I don't know if it's hard for you or if you have some words that, if there are some words that you don't know, but I think any of you can form all these 3 sentences with ease if you kind of study on the bits and parts that you don't know, that you're not really proficient on, basically. But I think any one of you could write this introduction or something like this introduction with ease. I think. Josephine, you don't agree? I think you could, but this requires, of course, advanced grammatical knowledge, and it kind of needs to, it kind of also requires that practice, basically. I don't think anyone can write like this, even a native person, by the way, anyone can write like this without kind of practicing it first. Because even though we know a language really well, we don't usually know how to write academically. So for example, even in my own native language, I wouldn't be able to write academically if I didn't practice. Josephine, you lack in linking words? Yes. You might. I think a lot of the people who learn English as a second language have some trouble in linking words in different grammatical structures such as noun clause and relative clause. If you know where you lack, you have the opportunity to actually learn them, right? So basically what I would do if I were you, I would try to learn some linking words, some common linking words, and kind of try to form first simple sentences and then really complex sentences with them. Basically, Abby, you raised your hand. I will give you permission to speak in a moment. There's a question. Please tell the summary. Can you tell me more on what you want to ask in that? So please tell the summary. I don't know what you mean. I'm so sorry. If you write like a clarification on what you're asking, so telling the summary, I will of course answer that. And the question is from Masab Amin. You can just expand in that. Abi, go ahead.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
Yeah, ma'am, I just wanted to know that, all the time when I see some this essays when you guys are just showing to us, in all those essays, the intro parts is like only 2 to 3 sentences or more than, not more than 5 sentences, like almost 50 to 60 word or less than that. But
Mhm.
when it's come to my writing skills, na, I don't know how it comes, but I always jump onto 80 to 90 words. So is it okay or not? Like I want to ask that because sometimes my second paragraph is less like smaller than first one. It
Mhm,
seems like that. So is it okay or not? Like the all the thing that we have to convey are like what we want to say. The only
mhm.
thing we have to do is we have to convey our emotions and what we try to say to the examiner. So we like I can write on same basis or I'll have to like some like cut short them in
Mhm.
some parts.
So basically, your introduction and your conclusion paragraphs should
Yeah.
definitely be shorter than the body paragraphs.
Okay, ma'am.
And I would suggest you to just leave the introduction paragraph in three, at most four sentences. Because if you write more than that, you won't have enough time, energy, or place to write
Yeah,
the
yeah,
paragraph.
yeah,
And the body paragraphs are where you give the details, so they have to be longer, right?
yeah,
So
obviously.
I would suggest you to just paraphrase the question, sorry, the information. If there's another
Okay.
information sentence, paraphrase that second sentence and write the answer to the question right away and nothing else, basically.
Okay, ma'am. Like I took example, like yesterday I was trying to write an essay
Mhm,
on like crime shows in TVs and televisions and newspaper. That is it good to telecast or show such kinds of news and like broadcast them or not? Like is it like what is my opinion? So
mhm,
I just start like introducing like television and newspaper. So now I think that I'm like wasting my time to let them know that what is television, what they do, or what is newspaper, rather than just directly jumping and just directly paraphrase the thing. Na? You
mhm,
just want that to me like two to three sentence.
mhm. Basically, everything you do in English helps, but
Okay.
if you have like a really short time before you take the exam, so for example, if you're taking the exam in a month, I
Yeah.
would suggest you to focus on essays, reading essays, reading like example essays or writing essays, more than watching the news or reading the on the news or listening to anything. So basically, if you have like 2 or 3 months before you take the exam, you can do
Yeah, ma'am.
all those. They will give you different vocabularies, different grammatical structures, which would be really good. But if you have less time than that, I would suggest you to focus on IELTS materials only.
Actually, I do have like I don't have so much time. I'm just planning to give by the end of this month.
All right, so I
So
definitely suggest you to read example essays rather than all these different things.
okay.
Or focus on IELTS materials only.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, no worries. Let's have another question from the chat. Do we have to mention some advantage or disadvantage in this paragraph? Definitely not, Ansa. You don't have to talk about the advantages and disadvantages just yet. Here, you need to only say general things about the topic, so paraphrase the topic, and then say their advantages and disadvantages, and that's it. Where we explain the advantages and disadvantages is the body paragraphs, basically. So, no disadvantages or advantages in the introduction paragraph. We will talk about them in the body paragraphs. And there's also another question in the chat box. I lack words like great deal or whilst. I would have written a lot of or while instead of whilst. All right, so whilst is basically a fancy way of saying while, actually. And you don't actually have to use whilst. While and whilst, they give the same effect to the examiner, basically. Because whilst is just something, let's say the queen, may she rest in peace, would use. So if you say while instead of whilst, that would be good. But I would try to find the synonyms of a lot of. So, for example, various, numerous, a great deal of are some of those, because a lot of is used a lot actually. And if we can find different versions of the things that we use really frequently, that would help our English, our vocabulary at least, a lot. So, if you have the time, I would suggest you to look up the synonyms of the things that you use quite frequently and try to incorporate them in your writing. What is the synonym for another advantage? You can say a lot of things. You can say, let's say, an additional pro, an additional benefit, or another benefit. Or you can say, change the whole structure, saying that people can benefit from something. So you don't have to only use the exact synonyms, but you can change the grammatical structure too. So remember, in the first part, while we're paraphrasing, we did not just say there are a lot of pros and cons. We also said such change leads to. So it causes various pros and cons, right? So you can change the grammatical structure altogether too. Instead of saying another advantage, you can just say people also benefit from this in this way, which would be a really, really good way of paraphrasing another advantage. All right, no worries. If you have no other questions on the introduction paragraph, let's move on to the first body paragraph. It goes, there are both advantages and disadvantages to this new development. There are definite advantages to people being allowed to work from home. The main advantage is that it gives workers more flexibility in their working lives. This can be particularly useful for parents or people who live far from their workplace. Working from home is also more comfortable. You can take a break whenever you need. Another advantage is that you can work for companies in other countries through internet. Therefore, people can apply for jobs globally as well as locally. So, this paragraph focuses on two advantages, and it has again shown us a lot of different grammatical structures and different vocabularies. So, working through the internet is one of them instead of saying work from home. And there are two advantages, so it answers the question really well because the question asks for advantages in the plural form. But there is one thing that this person should have refrained from, so this person shouldn't have done. And what do you think that is? Of course, it's not a big mistake, so it wouldn't reduce this person's point to, let's say, band 4, but still, another way of doing that thing would be better. What do you think that is? Josephine said advantage is repeated. Yes, that shows the examiner that this person cannot actually paraphrase the word advantage that much. It would be better if this person used other things instead of advantage. So that reduces our vocabulary range, that lexical resource criteria point a bit, right? But there was some other thing that I was thinking of. Do you know what it is? Or let's see what it is together. I will give you a few seconds to think. As Josephine said, advantages is repeated. What else? I will give you a hint. It's related to the structure of the essay, the structure of the first body paragraph. Examples. Even though this paragraph does not say, for example, it actually has examples. For example, it just says people who live far from their workplace. So this is an example, right? It can be useful for people or parents who live far from their workplace. Not all people, but especially people who live far from their workplace. So even though this paragraph does not contain the linking word for example or for instance, it still has examples. So that's not it. I felt the last line looks fishy. Let's look at that. Therefore, people can apply for jobs globally as well as locally. I think that is a really good supporting sentence, by the way, because it explains why this is an advantage. So you can work from companies in other countries or through the internet. So this is an advantage like this. I think that last sentence is really necessary to explain the sentence before it. All right, let me tell you what it is. I would personally prefer not to include the word disadvantages as a topic sentence to the first body paragraph. Because in the first body paragraph, we're talking about the advantages, right? So we need to write a topic sentence that will explain the advantages. So we will need to show the examiner, even in the first sentence, that we will be talking about advantages in this paragraph. So this is kind of what I would refrain from doing, because remember, what we need to do is to write a topic sentence as the first sentence in each body paragraph, and that topic sentence should tell the examiner what we're focusing on in that paragraph. So if you write advantages and disadvantages in the first body paragraph, the examiner might be confused as to thinking, will this paragraph be on both advantages and disadvantages? Question mark, right? So I would just say there are a lot of advantages to this development, basically. And that's what I was thinking of. But of course, this does not reduce this person's point grammatically or pen score dramatically. It just kind of affects the whole organization idea, right? Because definitely there are not disadvantages here. So disadvantages are not explained in this paragraph. That was it. Yes, Abby, you may ask a question.
Yeah, ma'am. I just want to ask the first sentence you said now from the second paragraph, there are both advantages and disadvantages to this new development. Rather
Mhm.
than writing here, we can write it on the first paragraph.
Yes, we
So
can
it
write
would
the
be,
introduction.
it would be, yeah. So it will like just come in a flow, and by second paragraph we can just say like from second paragraph we can write two advantages, and in third we can write two disadvantages, or
Yeah,
else we can do one advantage and one disadvantage. In then again in third we can do second advantage, second disadvantage, like using that although or something what however, like some contrast words.
do you mean writing 3 body paragraphs?
No, ma'am. I'm saying to the like we have to more than one advantage or disadvantage, no? So
Yeah,
I am saying that in second paragraph we can write one advantage, and then again with support with that, then we can say like however, like or although, yeah, again then we can write another disadvantage, like
yeah,
other disadvantage.
yeah,
Then in third paragraph we can write second advantage and second disadvantage, and then we come up with the conclusion part.
yeah. I got it. You can do that structure too. So your friend asked if he can structure the essay like this. I will write in the chat box so everyone is on the same page. So
Yeah.
in the first body, it talks about one advantage and one disadvantage, and repeating the same process in the second body paragraph. That could be a way of structuring that essay, but it would be risky, because if you're writing both advantages and disadvantages in a paragraph, you would kind of have to link them together. So, for example, if you're
Some
writing,
connection.
saying working from home is advantageous because you can see your family during your work hours, you will have to find a disadvantage of the same thing. So saying, but seeing your family during your work days, you might be bored, kind of. So they need to be kind of related to each other.
Yeah, if you have that much of source, or if it relevant to that, so
Mhm.
that we can take this step, na?
Yeah,
Otherwise, just go with the same thing, like two advantage in one body paragraph and two disadvantage in another
mm,
body paragraph.
yeah. I would personally not complicate things and just write
Okay,
one advantage and one
sure,
disadvantage.
ma'am. By the way, ma'am, any plus marks on writing such kinds of like thing, or they don't like really care about such things, like you are writing one advantage, one disadvantage
They don't
in the
care
same
as long
paragraph.
as it's relevant and
uh,
correct. They don't care.
okay, ma'am.
So
Okay, then why to take a risk?
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
sure,
basically,
ma'am, sure.
writing one advantage and one disadvantage in the first body paragraph, even though it's a harder job to do, does not make you gain any more points than writing like this, basically. All right, any other questions? All right, let's move on to the second body paragraph then. On the other hand, working from home can also have its disadvantages. So I think this is a perfect topic sentence, by the way. Traveling to work and working in an office with others can be a very friendly activity that many enjoy, especially if they live independently. Without this social interaction, many people might feel very lonely. Furthermore, many people may lack the sufficient discipline to complete the work they need without colleagues around. So this is a rather shorter paragraph than the first paragraph, but it's still longer than the introduction and the conclusion, so it's okay. And it has the correct linking word because it's moving on to the disadvantages, and it has two disadvantages, so it is good too. So in terms of structure, it works fine. What do you think about the details? So what about the grammar or the vocabulary or coherence, let's say? This paragraph lacks examples, Ansa says in the comments. So yes, I would give more detailed examples. For example, even this one is a detailed example, right? Because this sentence talks about one particular instance, so it's an example. This one also has a similar structure, saying especially if they live independently, but kind of does not dwell on that so much, I would say. So I would kind of focus more on these, especially for the second disadvantage, because the discipline idea is not really explained that much, I would say. It's only in one sentence, and it's not kind of really detailed enough, I would say. But it still does the job. It still gets a really good band grade because it shows a lot of different grammatical structures again. So this person used if, without, and a sentence starting with a gerund, traveling or working. And it also used modals like can, have, like might, feel, a correct linking word saying furthermore, and synonyms of enough saying sufficient, and lack. I think they're really, really good in terms of vocabulary. That would get this person going, basically. And we have a relative clause here, complete the work they need. So this is a relative clause sentence. This is a relative clause. Which is really good because it doesn't actually say the work which they need. They just say the work they need, which is a short version of saying the same thing. Basically, it has really good grammatical structures and vocabularies, different vocabularies. So in terms of that, it kind of saves this person from getting a lower band score because they did not give enough details. Using these different grammatical structures and vocabularies actually helps the examiner greatly, because otherwise, if the person did not give details and did not use enough grammatical structures and vocabularies, they would get a lower band score than this. Josephine says we lack our routine, but I'm not sure what you mean. I'm so sorry. Can you explain that a bit? You can also open your microphone and speak, or just explain me in the chat. Both are fine. While you're doing that, let's focus on the conclusion paragraph and kind of wrap it up. So the conclusion paragraph starts with a correct linking word saying in conclusion. So in conclusion, there are advantages and disadvantages to working from home. Perhaps the ideal arrangement would be to spend part of the working week in an office with colleagues and part of the working week at home with a certain amount of flexibility and comfort. So in two sentences, this person actually could summarize all of the ideas that he or she has written about, right? So it does a great job in terms of the summary, because it kind of also used different vocabularies too, like ideal arrangement, colleagues, working at home, working week, like different uses of the same word. They all show the examiner something. They all say something in terms of this person's English level of English. Uh, you want me to highlight different sentences used in this essay? So, for example, this one was really good. The work they need. Also, let's see. So this one was good. So starting with a gerund is really good. Uh, this is good. It's not different. Can also feel or might feel. They're not different, but they're still showing the examiner that this person knows how to use models. So this one is pretty good because it connects the two sentences with a clause, which I think this person has not done before. I think this is a really good sentence, may lack the sufficient discipline to complete the working. I think this sentence overall is really good, by the way, because it has models, synonyms, paraphrasing, relative clauses, if clause here, like without. I think this is really good. In terms of compound and complex, all right, let's see. So as well as it is a really good linking word, by the way. It's a way of saying forming complex sentences. Let me see. So this is really good. People who live far from their workplace. Again, this is a relative clause. Also, this here is that, because that helps us put another CVO, so sentence there. And whilst, and how we work, and which. There. But you can find all of these here in this table. So basically, if you use some of these, you will be forming complex sentences. All right, let me see what you mean the lack of discipline by the lack of discipline. Lack of discipline also leads to mess in our lives, for instance, during pandemic. Oh, all right, so you were giving an example to this one. So you were kind of explaining, supporting that idea with another sentence, I think, Josephine. And I think that, yes, all right. I think that's a really good way of explaining this and giving that example of pandemic, because yes, lack of discipline, especially during the pandemic, affected a lot of people, I think. And that would be a really good way of also giving examples from your own experience, because the question also asks for examples from our own knowledge and experience. I think, Josephine, that would be a great way of supporting that idea, that argument. Really good. So overall, what do you think this essay gets? Which band score? What band score this essay gets? While you're answering on that, there's a paragraph in the chat box. I will read that really quickly. There are lots of advantages of remote working, like time and energy physically saved. Yes, the save time and energy. I think that paragraph in the chat box is really, really good, by the way. It has different structures, different vocabularies. It's really good. But unfortunately, I don't have enough time to kind of read all the essays that are in the chat box. I'm sorry for that. So I cannot be giving like really detailed feedbacks, but I think overall it's really good. What do you think this essay gets in terms of band score? I would say it's around 8 or 8.5 at most. I don't think it gets a 9 because it has repeated use of some words, and even though it has like really different grammatical structures, it lacks some details, some examples and supporting arguments. So I think at best it gets an 8.5, but at least it gets an 8 because it has used all these different grammatical structures and vocabularies. even though there are some repeated words. So it gets an 8. I don't think it gets a 9 because there are some mistakes, right? So it has repeated use of words. It has some like structural problems kind of here and there. It doesn't explain this idea like really detailedly, so it wouldn't get a 9. But it would definitely be more than 7.5 because the level of English, in terms of its level of English, it's so much better than a 7 or 7.5 essay. Basically, it accomplishes all the things that lexical resource and grammatical range and accuracy gets. Because if you see here, band 8 needs to use a majority of sentences error-free, but this one says produces frequent error-free sentences. I think this one, grammatically, is definitely an 8. And lexical resources, it's definitely 7.5 or 8. But in terms of the other two, I think it gets 8, 8.5. So overall, it would get an 8, basically. All right. Any questions before we end this class? And don't go just yet. I will now send you a survey link, which I hope you will fill. We take those survey links really seriously. We kind of check everything you write, and we take those feedbacks. We think about them. We kind of try to see what we can do to increase the things, to improve the things that we're doing. So basically, I would be really helpful if you, oops, sorry, something happened. I don't know how to not publish this. Sorry. All right. So I've sent you something else. I don't know how to delete this. All right. I did. I will send you the survey link. Sorry for the inconvenience. I'm sorry. I will send you the survey link right now. You can get the recording, by the way. You can see them on our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel, Clasital. You can watch them there. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. Sorry, we don't have the option to give feedbacks to essays right now. We're working on that, but right now we don't have that option. I'm sorry, but we're working on that. We're talking on that. We will see how we can do the feedback thing. For the recording, you can check our YouTube channel, and for the survey, you can click the link. And my name is Gizem. You can fill out that link. I would be really appreciated. The YouTube link is there. I will send you again. Yes, it's sent again. I think that's all I'm going to say. Thank you for joining the class. And again, as a reminder, I would really appreciate it if you filled out the survey. I'm so happy that you've joined our class and you've kind of participated. That was really good. Thank you so much. We have a lot of classes throughout the week, both the weekdays and the weekends, other listening, reading, writing sessions. I think they would be really helpful for you. You can check them on the Clasital webpage. And if you want to know more about any other question type in any other thing, you can visit the Clasital video thing. Like, there are a lot of videos in our library. You can check the library to see other task types and other information on IELTS, basically. All right. If there are no questions, happy to see you all and hope to see you next week.